That's a nice little hobby you've got there, Mr. Davies. It would be a terrible shame if the city's permitting department found out you were running an unlicensed industrial business from your garage. The voice was syrupy sweet, but the words were pure venom, each one dripping with the kind of smug authority only a newly elected HOA president could muster. I looked up from the piece of black walnut I was sanding, the orbital sander in my hand whining down to a stop. There she stood on the other side of my meticulously maintained zoysia grass, a monument to suburban tyranny. Her name was Karen Thompson, a woman whose entire personality seemed to be stitched together from floral print blouses, oversized sunglasses, and a bottomless well of righteous indignation. She clutched a clipboard to her ample chest like a holy shield, its pages fluttering with what I could only assume were violations, infractions, and a detailed catalog of my personal sins against the covenants, conditions, and restrictions of the Oakmont Meadows Homeowners Association. My garage door was wide open, a concession to the humid North Carolina afternoon, and the scent of sawdust and fresh-cut wood hung in the air, a fragrance I considered a form of aromatherapy. To Karen, it was apparently the stench of rebellion. I set the sander down on my workbench, the heavy slab of maple I'd built it from as solid and unyielding as my own resolve. I wiped my hands on a rag, taking a slow, deliberate breath. In the Army, they teach you to assess a threat before you engage, and everything about Karen screamed unexploded ordnance. "It's a workshop, Karen," I said, my voice calm, level. "For a hobby, I make furniture, mostly for friends, sometimes for charity." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a predator's smile, all teeth and no warmth. "That's what they all say, but the noise, the dust, the constant deliveries of materials?" She gestured vaguely at a neat stack of lumber tucked away by the side of my house. "It constitutes a nuisance. Furthermore, any activity that generates income even for charity can be defined as a commercial enterprise under Section 4, Paragraph B of the bylaws. The fines are $500 per day, retroactive to the day the activity commenced." My blood ran cold, not with fear, but with a sudden, sharp clarity. This wasn't about noise or dust. This was a power play. I'd lived here for 2 years, a quiet widower who kept to himself, and this was the first time the HOA had ever shown an interest in my existence, conveniently right after Karen had seized the throne. She was testing the fences, seeing who would fold. She'd picked the wrong soldier. If you've ever felt the cold, clammy hand of a petty tyrant on your shoulder trying to squeeze the joy out of your life one rule at a time, then hit that subscribe button right now. I want you to drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and share your own HOA nightmare, because misery loves company, but justice loves an audience. This wasn't just about my workshop. This was about a promise I made to my late wife, and I'll be damned if I was going to let a clipboard-wielding despot tear it down. The story really begins not with Karen's declaration of war, but with a silence. The profound, echoing silence of an empty house after my wife, Martha, passed away. I'd spent 30 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, building things, solving problems, leading teams. When I retired, I was adrift. The structure was gone. The mission was over. Martha had been my anchor, and without her, the silence was deafening. It was her idea for me to get back into woodworking. "You need to build something, Mark," she'd said, her voice weakened by the illness but her spirit still strong. "Not for the Army, not for a paycheck, for you. Make something beautiful." After she was gone, her words became my new mission. I bought this house in Oakmont Meadows specifically because it had a 3-car garage and a tolerant policy on workshop noise, or so the realtor had assured me. I spent the first year turning that garage into a sanctuary. I insulated the walls, installed a professional-grade dust collection system that was quieter than most household vacuums, and invested in the best tools I could afford. My first project was a simple rocking chair, built from cherry wood, a tribute to the one Martha always sat in on our front porch. Building it was therapy. The focus required the scent of the wood, The slow transformation from rough lumber to a finished piece, it filled the silence. It gave me purpose. Soon, friends from my old unit started asking for things: a shadow box for a retiring colonel, a custom-built flag case for a fallen comrade's family. I never charged a dime for labor, only asking them to cover the cost of the wood. The work was my reward. Then came the project for the local Veterans Center, a dozen handcrafted bookcases for their new library. That's when the lumber delivery started, and apparently, that's when I landed on Karen Thompson's radar. My daughter Jenna, who lived a few towns over, worried about me. She was a 911 dispatcher, a job that exposed her to the worst of humanity on a daily basis, and it made her fiercely protective. "Dad, are you sure about this neighborhood?" she'd asked when I first moved in. "HOAS can be intense." I'd laughed it off. "I've negotiated with warlords in Afghanistan, Jen. I think I can handle a suburban book club." I had no idea how wrong I was. My first official notice from Karen arrived a week after our confrontation. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope, left tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck. The letter inside was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive legalese, citing the aforementioned Section 4, Paragraph B, and levying a fine of $3,500, 7 days at $500 a day. My crime? Conducting an unapproved commercial enterprise. My blood pressure spiked, but I forced it down. Panic is a luxury you can't afford on the battlefield, or apparently in the suburbs. I sat down at my dining room table, the very table I had built with my own hands, and began to formulate a counteroffensive. This was just another engineering problem, a fortress of bureaucracy to be systematically dismantled. I pulled out the thick binder of HOA documents I'd received at closing, blew the dust off, and started reading. I spent the next 3 days immersed in the Oakmont Meadows covenants, conditions, and restrictions. It was a document so dense and poorly written it could have been used as a torture device. But 30 years of deciphering government contracts and military regulations had trained me for this. I read every line, every subsection, every addendum, highlighting passages, making notes in the margins. Karen had made a critical error. She had cited a rule, but she hadn't understood its context. Section 4, Paragraph B, was indeed about commercial enterprises, but the defining clause, which she had conveniently omitted from her letter, specified that the rule applied to businesses that generated significant vehicular or foot traffic, produced disruptive noise or odors beyond the norm for a residential area, or involved on-site client services. My hobby met none of those criteria. The occasional lumber delivery was no different from a neighbor getting a new sofa from Pottery Barn. My noise levels were, as I would soon prove, well within acceptable limits. I didn't have clients, I had beneficiaries. This wasn't a business, it was a passion. My response had to be as formal and unyielding as hers. I drafted a 3-page letter on my computer citing the full text of the bylaw she had misquoted. I attached a sworn affidavit stating that I had never received payment for my labor and that my work was conducted on a not-for-profit basis for personal satisfaction and charitable contribution. I included a letter from the director of the Veterans Center, thanking me for the generous donation of handcrafted bookcases and confirming that no money had changed hands. I also included a list of every project I had completed, noting the recipient and the charitable nature of the work. It was a package of irrefutable proof. But I knew that wasn't enough. This was about setting a precedent. I concluded my letter by respectfully requesting that the HOA board provide a written clarification of their definition of commercial enterprise to avoid future misunderstandings for all residents. It was a polite way of saying, "You're wrong, and now you have to admit it in writing." I made 3 copies of everything, one for my records, one for my lawyer, a precaution I now knew was necessary, and the original, which I decided to deliver in a way that would send a clear message. I didn't leave it under her windshield wiper. I didn't mail it. I hand-delivered it to the official HOA management company, a soulless office in a strip mall 20 minutes away, and paid the extra $10 for a signed, time-stamped receipt of delivery. Paperwork is a weapon, and I had just fired my first carefully aimed shot. The response was a week of blessed silence. I imagined Karen and her board of sycophants poring over my letter, their faces souring as they realized their flimsy accusation had been so thoroughly demolished. I used the time to finish the bookcases for the vet center, the work feeling more meaningful than ever. Each pass of the hand plane, each precisely cut dovetailed joint, was an act of defiance. On the 8th day, another cream-colored envelope appeared, this time in my actual mailbox. Inside was a curt, one-sentence letter stating that after further review, the fine had been rescinded. There was no apology, no clarification, no admission of error. It was a silent, grudging retreat. A small victory, but I knew it was only the end of the first battle, not the war. Karen had been publicly, if quietly, thwarted. A person like that doesn't just let it go. They regroup. They rearm. They look for a new line of attack. I didn't have to wait long to find out what it would be. The next phase of Karen's campaign began not with a letter, but with a presence. Suddenly, she was everywhere. If I was out mowing my lawn, her curtains would twitch. If I took my trash cans to the curb, her head would pop up over the fence like a prairie dog, her eyes scanning the contents for unapproved refuse. Her primary obsession, however, remained my garage. She had lost the commercial enterprise battle, so she pivoted to a war of attrition fought on the grounds of nuisance. The new attacks came in the form of emails from the HOA management company, always citing an anonymous complaint. We have received a report of excessive noise originating from your property on Tuesday at 2:15 p.m. A complaint has been filed regarding sawdust and debris on the public sidewalk in front of your residence. It has been reported that noxious fumes consistent with wood stains or lacquers were detected emanating from your property. Each complaint was petty, baseless, and clearly orchestrated by one person. I swept my sidewalk daily. My dust collection system was hospital grade. My low VOC stains had less odor than her cloying rose bushes. It was harassment, pure and simple, but cloaked in the sterile language of official procedure. I knew arguing would be pointless. Arguing required a rational opponent. Instead, I adapted and overcame. I went online and purchased a certified, calibrated decibel meter. The next time I used my table saw, I placed the meter on the edge of my property line, aimed directly at her house. The reading peaked at 62 decibels, roughly the equivalent of a normal conversation. The local noise ordinance didn't kick in until 85 decibels. I took a time-stamped photo of the reading. I did the same for my planer, my router, my sander. I started a new file on my computer labeled Karen Dossier and began documenting everything. Every email from the HOA was saved. Every time I saw her peering over the fence, I made a note of the date and time. I installed a new security camera system, the kind with high-definition video and clear audio covering the front of my house, my driveway, and the side yard where I stored my lumber. The initial purpose was to document any potential trespassing or vandalism, but it also served to record my own activities, proving that I was cleaning up after myself and that no clouds of sawdust were drifting into the street. I was building a fortress of evidence, brick by digital brick. My daughter Jenna was furious on my behalf. "Dad, this is insane. She's stalking you, Shaw-Moy," she said during one of our weekly calls. "You should get a restraining order." "It's not that simple, Jen," I explained. "Right now it's all deniable. It's anonymous complaints and board oversight. If I go for a restraining order and lose, it makes me look like the unreasonable one. I have to let her escalate. I need something concrete, something undeniable that proves this is a personal vendetta." I didn't know then how prophetic those words would be, or that Jenna herself would become the key to getting that undeniable proof. The escalation came a few weeks later. I was working on a particularly important project, a custom-built crib for my army buddy Dave, whose wife was expecting their first child. I was using a beautiful piece of tiger maple, and the rhythmic hum of the sander was the only sound in the garage. It was a peaceful Saturday morning. At around 10:30 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jenna. "Dad, you are not going to believe this." My heart clenched. A text from her during her shift was rare. "What is it? Are you okay?" The reply came a moment later. I'm fine, but you need to be ready. Mom's old book club friend Karen Thompson just called 911 on you. My fingers tightened around the phone. A cold fury, clean and sharp, cut through me. This was it. The escalation I'd been waiting for, delivered with a level of malicious absurdity I hadn't anticipated. She had bypassed the HOA's petty email system and gone straight to dialing the emergency line. What was the complaint? I texted back, my mind already shifting into tactical mode. I turned off the sander, plunging the garage into silence. The only sound was the gentle whir of the dust collector. Quote, there's an illegal factory operating in my neighbor's garage. The noise is deafening. It's been going on for hours. I think he's using dangerous explosive machinery. I'm afraid for the safety of the neighborhood. End quote. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. Deafening. Explosive machinery. She wasn't just filing a complaint. She was trying to create a crisis, hoping to trigger a massive, overwhelming response. Jenna's next text was all business. Patrol unit is en route. Standard procedure for a noise disturbance, but I flagged it with the shift sergeant given the caller's history. They know her. Just be calm, be polite. Let them see for themselves. The call is recorded, by the way, every word, it's evidence. It's evidence. My daughter was a chip off the old block. I walked to the front of the garage and looked out. The street was quiet, bathed in the late morning sun. I took a deep breath, centering myself. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I did a quick visual sweep of the workshop. Everything was neat, organized. The floor was clean. Tools were racked. The half-finished crib sat on the workbench, looking as innocent as the baby it was meant for. There was nothing here that screamed dangerous, explosive machinery. A few minutes later, a police cruiser rolled silently to a stop at the curb. 2 officers got out, a younger man and a more seasoned, weary-looking veteran. They walked up the driveway, their expressions neutral but cautious. I met them at the edge of the garage, my hands in plain sight. Good morning, officers, I said calmly. I'm Mark Davies. I think you're here for me. The senior officer, whose name tag read Miller, gave a slight nod. We received a call about a noise disturbance, sir, something about an industrial operation. He glanced past me into the garage, his eyes taking in the scene. I saw a flicker of something, annoyance, resignation. My workshop, yes, I said. My hobby is woodworking. The caller, I believe, was my neighbor, Karen Thompson, the HOA president. At the mention of Karen's name, Officer Miller's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. He shared a look with his partner. Yeah, that was the name on the call log, he said, his tone flat. She seemed concerned. She's been concerned for months, I replied, keeping my voice even. Concerned that I was running a business, which I'm not. Concerned about dust, which I control with that system. I pointed to the large dust collector in the corner. And concerned about noise. Would you like a demonstration? Miller seemed to consider it. What were you running when the call was made? An orbital sander, I said. Is this one right here? I picked it up. Mind if I turn it on for you? He nodded. I switched it on. The tool emitted a low, steady hum, barely louder than a dishwasher. I held it up. This is the deafening noise you were called about. I then walked over to my table saw, the largest and potentially loudest tool in the shop. This is my most powerful piece of equipment. With the soundproofing I've installed in the walls and the garage door, the noise at her property line is about 62 decibels. The town ordinance limit is 85. Officer Miller held up a hand. That's not necessary, sir. He looked around the pristine workshop again, his eyes lingering on the baby crib. Is that what you're working on? Yes, sir. A gift for a friend from my old unit. He's about to be a new father. The officer nodded slowly. Look, Mr. Davies, I'm sorry to have bothered you. We have to respond to every call, but it's pretty clear what's going on here. His partner, who hadn't said a word, finally spoke up. We get calls from her about once a week. Kids playing basketball in the street, someone parking too close to her driveway, suspicious delivery trucks. You're not the first. That single statement was a gold mine. It was confirmation, a pattern of behavior, now unofficially verified by law enforcement. "I appreciate you coming out, officers," I said sincerely, "and I appreciate you doing your jobs." As they walked back to their car, Miller turned. "For what it's worth, sir, that's a beautiful crib." They got in their car and drove away. The crisis Karen had tried to manufacture had evaporated into nothing. But she had given me the greatest gift imaginable, an official record of her malicious, bad faith complaint, narrated in her own hysterical voice and taken by my own daughter. The war had just entered a new phase, and I finally had my heavy artillery. The police visit was a turning point. It solidified in my mind that this was no longer a simple dispute to be managed. It was a campaign to be won. Karen's willingness to misuse emergency services demonstrated a level of vindictiveness that could not be ignored or appeased. It had to be confronted and dismantled. My Karen dossier was no longer just a defensive measure, it was now an offensive playbook. That afternoon, I sat down and began to strategize like I was planning a military operation. The objective: remove Karen Thompson from power and neutralize her ability to harass me or any other resident. The means: a multi-front assault using bureaucracy, legal pressure, and community organizing. My first step was to formalize the evidence. I sent a polite, professionally worded email to the chief of police, copying the town manager. I thanked them for the prompt and professional response of Officers Miller and his partner to the 911 call placed from my neighbor's address. I calmly explained the context of the ongoing harassment campaign by the HOA president and stated that the call was a malicious and vexatious abuse of emergency services. I didn't demand any action. I simply placed the event on the official record, creating a paper trail that led outside the insular world of the HOA. This was a flanking maneuver. Next, I turned my attention to the neighborhood itself. The officer's comment that Karen called them weakly on her neighbors was a revelation. I wasn't her only target, I was just the one who was fighting back. There had to be others. I needed allies. My first visit was to the Hendersons, a retired couple in their late 70s who lived 3 doors down. I'd seen Karen in a heated discussion with Mr. Henderson over their front garden a month ago. I walked over on a Sunday afternoon carrying a small cutting board I'd made from leftover maple. Mrs. Henderson answered the door, a kind woman with a warm smile. I introduced myself properly and offered the board. "A little neighborly gift," I said. "I'm the woodworker down the street." Her smile widened. "Oh, you're the one she's been terrorizing. George, come here. It's Mr. Davies." George Henderson, a short, wiry man with sharp eyes behind thick glasses, appeared in the doorway. He shook my hand firmly. "Heard the police were at your place yesterday, figured it was her doing." They invited me in. Over iced tea, they told me their story. Karen had tried to fine them $50 a day for having 2 small decorative garden gnomes flanking their walkway, citing a bylaw against yard ornaments of a whimsical or fantastical nature. George, a retired accountant, had fought back, demanding the board produce a clear definition of whimsical, and the fine was eventually dropped. The gnomes were gone, but the resentment lingered. "She's a bully, plain and simple," George said, his voice tight with anger. "She gets a taste of power and it goes straight to her head. The rest of the board just rubber stamps whatever she wants." I then visited the Millers, a young family with 2 small children who lived across the street. Their violation? The color of their children's plastic slide, a vibrant primary blue that Karen had deemed not in harmony with the community's approved color palette. They were being fined $25 a day until they replaced it with an earth-toned one. They were exhausted, intimidated, and considering just giving in. I sat with them in their living room and laid out my files. I showed them my rescinded fine, my decibel readings, the security camera logs. I told them about the 911 call. "She's doing this to all of us," I said, my voice low and serious. "She's picking us off one by one, hoping we'll be too tired or too scared to fight. But if we stand together, if we pool our resources and our evidence, we can stop her." That evening, we held a secret meeting in my living room. The Hendersons, the Millers, and myself. It felt like the beginning of a resistance movement. We spread our violation notices and angry emails across my maple dining table. A pattern of targeted harassment immediately became clear. She went after new residents, the elderly, and families with young children, people she perceived as either ignorant of the rules or too vulnerable to fight back. George Henderson, the retired accountant, looked at the pile of paper with a grim expression. "This is bad," he said, "but I have a feeling it's just the tip of the iceberg. A person who operates like this in the open is almost certainly cutting corners in the dark. I bet the HOA's finances are a mess." He tapped a copy of the annual budget he'd brought with him. "They're legally required to open their books to any homeowner who requests an audit. She's counting on the fact that no one ever will." A slow smile spread across my face. "George," I said, "I think you just found our new line of attack." The decision to audit the HOA's finances was a critical escalation. It shifted our focus from defending against Karen's attacks to launching a preemptive strike at the heart of her power base. George Henderson was the perfect man for the job. His career as a forensic accountant had been spent untangling the deliberately knotted finances of shady businesses. Untangling Karen Thompson's petty kingdom would be child's play. The first step was the formal request. Following George's guidance, I drafted a letter to the HOA board, co-signed by the Hendersons and the Millers, formally invoking our rights under North Carolina state law and the HOA's own bylaws to inspect all financial records for the past 3 fiscal years. We didn't state a reason. We didn't have to. The law was on our side. We sent it via certified mail to the management company, the digital delivery confirmation our starting pistol. While we waited for the inevitable resistance, I made another crucial call. My old Army network is a resource I rarely tap, but this situation called for specialized expertise. I called a former captain from my engineering battalion, a man named Frank, who now ran a highly successful private security firm. I told him the whole story. He listened patiently before letting out a low whistle. "Mark, you've got a classic petty dictator on your hands. They're all the same. The playbook never changes." I told him my next step was likely a lawsuit, and I needed a recommendation for a lawyer. "I've got just the guy," Frank said without hesitation. "Ethan Cole. He's a bulldog, former JAG officer who now specializes in real estate and HOA law. He eats people like your Karen for breakfast. Tell him I sent you." I met with Ethan Cole the following week. He was a tall, sharp man in his 40s with a mind like a steel trap. I laid out the Karen dossier on his conference table. The letters, the photos of the decibel readings, the security camera logs, and the crown jewel. The official 911 call log Jenna had helped me obtain through a formal public records request. Ethan listened intently, his fingers steepled, his eyes scanning the documents. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "This is beautiful," he said, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. "This is one of the cleanest cases of targeted harassment and breach of fiduciary duty I've ever seen." He explained the legal strategy in plain, simple terms. We let her continue. We let her dig her own grave. The HOA management company will drag their feet on the financial records. They'll produce incomplete documents. We document their non-compliance. Let the fines on the Millers' slide accumulate. Let her send you more baseless warnings. We want her to overreach so badly that when we file, no judge on earth will see this as a simple neighborhood dispute. We're not just going to sue the HOA. We're going to sue her personally. He explained that as president, Karen had a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the entire community, not to use her power to settle personal scores. Every piece of evidence I had collected pointed to a clear breach of that duty. The 911 call was the kill shot, as he put it. It's demonstrable proof of malice. She didn't just disagree with you, she actively tried to cause you harm by summoning an emergency response under false pretenses. The plan was set. We would let Karen and the board refuse, delay, and obstruct the audit. We would let the fines pile up. Then, at the moment of maximum leverage, likely when they tried to place a lien on the Millers' property, We would file a comprehensive lawsuit that would not only exonerate us but hold Karen personally accountable for her actions, forcing her to pay damages out of her own pocket, not from the HOA's insurance. It was a legal trap baited with her own arrogance. As predicted, the HOA's response to our audit request was a masterclass in obstruction. First, they claimed the management company's offices were undergoing renovation and the files were inaccessible. Then they claimed their accountant was on an extended medical leave. Finally, after 2 strongly worded letters from Ethan, they provided a single cardboard box of jumbled, incomplete receipts and bank statements, missing entire months of data. It was exactly what we'd hoped for. George Henderson took the box back to his house and spread the contents across his dining room table. For the next 2 weeks, he lived and breathed those numbers. He'd call me late at night, his voice electric with discovery. "Mark, you won't believe this. There's a recurring monthly invoice for landscape consulting from a firm called Evergreen Solutions. It's for $2,000 a month." A quick online search revealed that Evergreen Solutions LLC was registered to a single member, Karen Thompson's brother-in-law. There was more. Thousands of dollars in community beautification funds spent on high-end saplings and landscape lighting that, when cross-referenced with Google Maps, were all located on one property, Karen's. There were charges for board lunches at expensive restaurants, administrative supplies from high-end stationery stores. It was a slush fund, pure and simple. George meticulously documented every discrepancy, every conflict of interest, every missing dollar, creating a spreadsheet that was as damning as a signed confession. The trap was almost set. All we needed was for Karen to take the final fatal step. The final piece of the trap fell into place on a Tuesday morning. A certified letter arrived at the Miller's house across the street. I watched from my window as a visibly distressed Mrs. Miller signed for it. A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was Mr. Miller, his voice a mixture of panic and fury. "They did it, Mark. They've placed a lien on our house." The fine for the unapproved blue slide had ballooned with late fees and administrative charges to over $2,000. The HOA had now made a legal claim against their property for that amount. It was the ultimate act of overreach, the final, fatal mistake Ethan Cole had been waiting for. "Don't worry," I told him, my voice calm and steady. "This is it. This is what we wanted. They've just handed us the keys to the kingdom." I immediately called Ethan. "We have the lien," I said. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a low, satisfied chuckle. "Excellent. It's time to go hunting." The next 48 hours were a blur of coordinated activity. Ethan's office drafted the lawsuit, a 60-page document of devastating precision. It named the Oakmont Meadows Homeowners Association, the entire board of directors, the third-party management company, and Karen Thompson, in her official and personal capacities, as defendants. The suit alleged breach of fiduciary duty, selective enforcement, targeted harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and abuse of process. It demanded the immediate removal of the lien on the Miller property, the rescinding of all fines and violations against our group, the payment of all our legal fees, and significant punitive damages from Karen Thompson personally. Our evidence was attached as exhibits: George Henderson's complete forensic audit of the HOA's finances, detailed down to the last penny, my log of Karen's surveillance activities complete with time-stamped security photos, the sworn affidavits from the Hendersons and the Millers, the decibel meter readings, the paper trail of obstructive communications regarding the audit request, and finally, Exhibit A, the transcript and official record of the 911 call. The lawsuit was filed electronically with the county court on Thursday afternoon. On Friday morning, a professional process server, a burly ex-cop hired by Ethan's firm, was dispatched to Oakmont Meadows. I had my front security camera feed open on my laptop. It was just after 9 a.m. when Karen's gleaming white SUV pulled into her driveway. She got out carrying shopping bags from an expensive department store. As she walked up her pristine flagstone path, the process server stepped out from behind a neatly trimmed Japanese maple on the public sidewalk. "Karen Thompson?" he asked, his voice booming and official. Karen stopped, startled, a look of annoyance on her face. "Yes? What is it?" The server handed her a thick legal envelope. "You've been served." I watched, mesmerized, as the scene unfolded in crystal clear high definition. Karen took the envelope, her brow furrowed. She tore it open. Her eyes scanned the first page. Her face, a mask of smug satisfaction just moments before, began to change. The color drained from her cheeks. Her jaw went slack. Her perfectly manicured hands began to tremble, causing the papers to rattle. She looked up from the lawsuit, her eyes wide with disbelief and dawning horror, and her gaze shot directly across the street right at my house, right at the discreet dome of the camera recording her every reaction. She knew. In that instant, she knew she hadn't been fighting a scattered group of disgruntled neighbors. She had walked into a meticulously planned ambush. Her mouth opened, and though I couldn't hear the audio from that distance, I could see the raw, unfiltered rage contort her features. She screamed something, a silent movie tirade directed at my house, shaking the lawsuit in her hand like a weapon that had just backfired in her face. Then, in a final glorious moment of impotent fury, she threw the entire 60-page document onto her perfect lawn, where the pages scattered in the morning breeze like defeated soldiers. The process server simply tipped his hat, turned, and walked away. The trap had been sprung. The lawsuit landed in Oakmont Meadows like a bomb. Within hours, the news, or at least a garbled version of it, had spread through the neighborhood's gossip network like wildfire. The process server had also served the other board members, quiet, compliant men and women who had blindly followed Karen's lead. Suddenly, they were named defendants in a serious lawsuit, their own personal assets potentially on the line. The panic was immediate and palpable. My phone started ringing with calls from neighbors I barely knew. Some were curious, some were supportive, and a few were angry, accusing me of making trouble for everyone. I politely directed them all to the public court filing, which was available online. I wanted the truth to come out, not through rumors, but through the cold, hard facts laid out in Ethan's legal document. The HOA board called an emergency closed-door meeting, to which Karen, I later learned, was not invited. Their insurance carrier had been notified, and the carrier's lawyers had taken one look at our lawsuit and Ethan's mountain of evidence and immediately taken control of the situation. The board members, who had acted like Karen's loyal lieutenants, were now scrambling to save themselves, likely tripping over each other to paint her as a rogue actor they had no control over. The next 2 weeks were a strange sort of limbo. The HOA's lawyers sent a flurry of motions and responses to Ethan, but it was the flailing of a cornered animal. They had no defense. Our evidence was too thorough, too well documented. Their only move was to try and settle, and to do it quickly, before the case went to discovery, where Ethan could start deposing people under oath, a process that would have been a bloodbath for them. Ethan advised we hold firm. "They're scared," he told me over the phone. "Their insurance will cover the HOA's liability, but not Karen's personal liability for malicious acts. She's on an island, and the tide is coming in. We don't accept their first offer or their second. We wait for them to give us everything we want." Meanwhile, the annual HOA meeting, which had been scheduled months in advance, was rapidly approaching. It was typically a sleepy, poorly attended affair where Karen would read a pre-approved budget and congratulate herself for another year of iron-fisted rule. This year, however, it was the most anticipated event in the neighborhood's history. The lawsuit was the only thing anyone was talking about. We knew this was our chance to take the fight public, to bypass the lawyers and the board and take our case directly to the people, our fellow homeowners. Our small resistance cell went into overdrive. George Henderson prepared a simplified, easy-to-understand presentation of his financial audit, complete with charts and graphs showing exactly where the money had gone. The Millers prepared to give a heartfelt, emotional statement about the stress and anxiety of having a lien placed on their home over a child's slide, and I prepared my own presentation. I had the audio of Karen's 911 call professionally cleaned up and queued up on a portable Bluetooth speaker. I edited together a short greatest hits video from my security camera footage. Karen peering over my fence, Karen snooping around my lumber pile, Karen having her epic meltdown on her front lawn after being served. The night of the meeting arrived. The community center clubhouse, usually half empty for these things, was packed. Every seat was taken. People were standing along the walls. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. The board members sat at a long table at the front of the room, looking pale and grim. At the center of the table was an empty chair. Karen Thompson was nowhere to be seen. The acting president, a nervous man named Bill, tried to rush through the agenda, but the residents weren't having it. "Where's Karen?" someone shouted from the back. "What's going on with this lawsuit?" yelled another. Bill stammered, trying to explain that due to pending litigation, they couldn't comment. That's when George Henderson stood up. "I can comment," he said, his voice ringing with the authority of a man who has the facts on his side. He walked to the front of the room, connected his laptop to the projector, and for the next 15 minutes, he walked the residents of Oakmont Meadows through the systematic looting of their community funds by their own president. The room was silent, then filled with angry murmurs. When George was done, it was my turn. I didn't need a projector. I just walked to the front of the room and stood before my neighbors. "For the past 6 months," I began, "my family and I, along with the Hendersons and the Millers, have been the subject of a targeted harassment campaign by Karen Thompson. She has abused her power, misused your money, and lied to all of us. She told you she was protecting the community's values. I'm going to let you hear for yourselves what she was really doing." I held up the speaker and pressed play. The room filled with the sound of the 911 dispatch tone, then Jenna's calm, professional voice. "911, what is your emergency?" And then Karen's voice, high-pitched and frantic. "There's an illegal factory operating in my neighbor's garage. The noise is deafening. I think he's using dangerous explosive machinery." A collective gasp went through the room. They were hearing with their own ears the sheer malice and fabrication. I let the entire call play out. When it was over, a stunned silence hung in the air. I then played the video clips on a large tablet showing her obsessive, bizarre behavior. The final image was her screaming on her lawn, shaking the lawsuit in the air. The murmurs in the room had now grown into a roar of outrage. People were on their feet, yelling at the board, demanding answers. The meeting had devolved into open rebellion. Through the chaos, a motion was made from the floor by a homeowner I'd never even met. A vote of no confidence in the entire board of directors and a demand for their immediate resignation. The motion was seconded by a dozen voices at once. Bill, the acting president, tried to argue that it wasn't on the agenda, that it was against procedure. But the will of the people in that room was a tidal wave, and it was about to wash him and the rest of Karen's cronies away for good. The vote of no confidence was a chaotic, beautiful thing. It wasn't a neat show of hands. It was a roar of acclamation. The residents, finally armed with the truth, were taking their community back. The board members, seeing the tide had turned irrevocably against them, had no choice but to resign on the spot. An interim board was elected right then and there, a slate of reasonable, respected homeowners led by none other than George Henderson himself. The old regime was toppled in a single night, not by a lawsuit, but by an informed citizenry. The legal battle, however, was not quite over. The HOA's insurance company, seeing the complete collapse of the old board and the overwhelming evidence against them, moved quickly to staunch the bleeding. Ethan Cole received a call the very next morning. Their new offer was a total surrender. The HOA agreed to settle on every single one of our terms. The lien on the Miller's house was to be removed immediately, with a formal letter of apology issued to the family. All fines and violations against our group were to be expunged from the record. The HOA's insurance would pay every cent of our legal fees, which had grown to a considerable sum. They also agreed to a full independent audit of the last 5 years of finances and to rewrite the most ambiguous and weaponized sections of the bylaws, with input from a committee of homeowners. It was a complete and total victory. But there was still the matter of Karen Thompson. The HOA settlement didn't cover her personal liability. She was now completely isolated. Her board had abandoned her, her neighbors despised her, and she was facing a lawsuit that targeted her personal assets. Her lawyer, a local guy clearly out of his depth against Ethan, tried a few desperate bluffs before realizing his client had no viable defense. The evidence of malice was just too strong. Ethan advised me that we could take her to court and likely win a massive judgment, but it would be a long, draining process. Or we could offer her a settlement that would achieve our primary goals, financial penalty and her removal from the community. We chose the latter. We weren't after blood, we were after justice and peace. The terms of Karen's personal settlement were simple and brutal. She was required to pay out of her own pocket a 5-figure sum in punitive damages. We decided unanimously that the money would be donated directly to the Veterans Center I had been building the bookcases for. She also had to sign a legally binding agreement that she would have no further contact of any kind with me, the Hendersons, or the Millers. And the final, most satisfying term, she and her husband had to put their house on the market within 30 days and move out of Oakmont Meadows. Facing financial ruin and public disgrace, she agreed. 3 weeks later, a for sale sign went up on her immaculate lawn. It sold in less than a month. I watched from my window as the moving truck pulled up. I saw her direct the movers with a sour, defeated expression on her face. She never once looked in my direction. As the truck pulled away, carrying her and her toxic presence out of our lives for good, a profound sense of peace settled over the neighborhood. The aftermath was a lesson in community healing. Under George Henderson's leadership, the new HOA board became a model of transparency and common sense. The finances were put in order. The bylaws were revised to be fair and clear, protecting property values without stifling personal freedom. The Millers bought a new, even brighter blue slide for their kids, and it became a beloved landmark on the street. The Hendersons' garden gnomes returned to their rightful place by the walkway, standing as tiny, cheerful symbols of the victory. And me? I went back to my workshop. The sound of my saw and sander no longer felt like an act of defiance, but a simple, joyful expression of who I was. The garage door was always open now, and neighbors would often stop by to chat, to see what I was working on, to admire the grain of a piece of wood. The workshop had transformed from a point of contention into a point of connection. A few months after Karen left, I finished the last project that had been interrupted by the conflict, the tiger maple crib for my friend Dave. I spent extra time on it, sanding the wood until it felt like silk, applying a non-toxic hand-rubbed oil finish that made the striped grain shimmer and glow. As I loaded it into my truck for delivery, George Henderson walked over from his yard. He looked at the crib, then at me, and smiled. "You know, Mark," he said, "in a way, Karen did us all a favor. She reminded us that a community isn't just a collection of houses. It's something you have to be willing to fight for." He was right. We had faced down a petty tyrant and won. We had replaced fear and division with unity and respect. We had taken back our neighborhood. I drove the crib over to Dave's house. He and his wife were ecstatic. Seeing the look on their faces, knowing the journey that piece of furniture had taken from a simple plank of wood to this symbol of new life and friendship was a greater reward than any legal victory. That evening I sat on my own front porch in the cherry rocking chair I had built for Martha. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the quiet street. The silence was back, but it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't the empty, echoing silence of loss. It was the full, peaceful silence of a mission accomplished, of a promise kept, of a home that was finally, truly my own.